Okay, this is sort of an annual thing that has gone on with this conference since it had a different name. It was called SVG Open for a while. And it's one of the things that distinguishes this conference, I think, from many others is the fact that practitioners and developers and implementers of the spec and designers of the spec all come together to talk about the emergence of new technologies for the web, particularly new graphical technologies, which is the emphasis of this conference. Anyhow, what I'd like to do today, we've gotten several responses from people over the internet, some questions that were submitted that I'd like to sort of begin with, asking people. So we're gonna let everybody introduce themselves. Alan had a very nice thing with his panel yesterday where he introduced everybody visually. I'm not so organized, but we'll let everybody start down the row, then introduce themselves, say what they're doing, which standards they're involved in. We've got a combination of W3C standards, Chronos things, SVG, CSS, HTML, lots of different things going on. And then after the introductions are made, then I'll refer to some questions that came over the internet, and then I'll open it up for audience questions. So why don't we start down at the far end? Frank, can you tell us who and how and why?
Sure, I'm Frank Olivier. I work on the Internet Explorer team at Microsoft. My team does all the graphical things in the browser, most recently WebGL.
Hello everyone, I'm Nikos. I'm from Canon in Sydney. It's often surprising to people that Canon are involved in working groups and web standards, but we've been using SVG quite heavily for a long time. And we're starting to branch out a bit more into other web technologies, and so I'm on the SVG working group, and I'm also started contributing a bit to WebKits.
I'm Doug Sheppers, Sheppazoo on Twitter. I work directly for W3C. Staff contact for several working groups. I'm involved in a lesser extent with CSS, but mostly with SVG, web audio, so web audio API, with, let's see, touch and pointer events, so touch interface stuff, and now most recently with the web annotations working group. And then I also do, I plan our W3C conference, and I also help with the webplatform.org developer site. I have stickers.
Hello, so I'm Eric Dahlström from Opera Software, and I also chair the SVG working group together with Cameron here. I've been working with SVG for quite a number of years. I started out by implementing the first SVG rendering parts of Opera Presto, which was around 10 years ago or so. I've now moved on to work on Blink, which is the rendering engine used in Chrome and the newer versions of Opera. So that's pretty much what I do. So I'm doing SVG parts in that currently.
Hello, as Eric said, my name's Cameron. I work for Mozilla. I'm on the layout team at Mozilla. And lately I've been implementing more CSS features than SVG features, although I've got my fingers in some SVG stuff as well, and also heavily involved in the standardization side of SVG. Yep.
Hey everyone, I'm Neil Travitt from NVIDIA. I am also the president of the Chronos group. We're developing WebGL. We're beginning to work on WebCL, and we're looking to expand OpenGL to accelerate SVG, and we're interested to talk with the web community to try and bring advanced visual processing and vision processing for augmented reality to the web.
I'm Dirk Schulze. I'm working for Adobe Systems, and I'm editor of different specifications like CSS transforms, CSS masking, filter effects, or SVG. I and my team, we are working on browser implementations as well to actually make these specifications real. We implement things in Internet Explorer, in That is too much. In WebKit, in Blink, as well as in Gecko, so 3 is enough for now. And we also concentrate ourselves on layout and text and graphics, which is quite a big of an area.
Wow. Wow, he works in Internet Explorer as well. It's amazing. Hi, I'm Alex Danilo from Google. I work closely with the Chrome team and the external web developer community as well. I've been on the SVG working group over many years, probably like over a decade, so really love graphics in general in browsers. So I kind of cover the general web technology space.
I'm Tom Jongba. I work on Inkscape. I represent Inkscape on the SVG working group, so mostly SVG.
All right, thanks. Yeah, as I say, we had a variety of questions come in from email and Twitter and so forth. Let me just sort of work down the list. Two questions related to the relationship between hardware and software, I guess. What is the biggest obstacle to better hardware acceleration and general performance for SVG? That's the first question.
Who wants to type this one? The biggest obstacle is convincing implementers to actually implement, I think, is probably the answer to that. At least it depends with Blink and Chrome, which is also part of Opera. SVG is not hardware accelerated, which is a bit of a bone I have to pick with the engineers. So it comes down to content and prioritization of tasks, and because everybody loves Canvas, Canvas became the perfect candidate for hardware acceleration. So inside Blink, Chrome, Canvas is hardware accelerated. SVG currently isn't, but that's changing. So over time, everything will become hardware accelerated. So the back end of, I don't know if people in the audience, there's a lot of varied people with journalism and everything. They understand that inside Chrome, it uses a thing called Skier, which is the rendering back end that underpins Android and Chrome. And Skier itself is moving to a full hardware accelerated mode. So once that transition happens, the entire browser will be accelerated. But Neil, you can talk on
Well, I think,
other vendors.
yeah, there's even more, I agree with you, but there's a more fundamental problem. That is that GPUs have been built for 3D and SVG is obviously 2D, and there's been a kind of an impedance mismatch between the two. And a lot of folks trying to accelerate PostScript and then Flash and now SVG and Canvas have found that it's actually not a non-trivial exercise to use the existing machinery in a 3D oriented GPU to provide effective and high quality acceleration for SVG. Lots of people have tried tessellation approaches. They typically end up making things go slower and you lose some quality. NVIDIA and other folks were working to make GPUs understand path as a fundamental primitive, and I think we've cracked it now from a technical point of view, but we've only cracked it like a year or two ago. It's still quite new. And I think the opportunity and the challenge we have is to get the GPU guys talking to the engine guys, to actually bring this new emergent opportunity to fruition in practice in shipping products.
So on the IE side, we have hardware accelerated SVG. We started doing that in 2009, I think. Everything is hardware accelerated, filters are hardware accelerated, so we're happy to see more people doing that. We'd love to see more content to do that.
So I think Firefox's position is probably at the same point as Blink and Chrome's at the moment, where Canvas has had a lot of focus on using Skier's WebGL backend for acceleration. I'm not sure if that's on all platforms or just some platforms. Whereas with SVG, at least for the painting of shapes and stuff, that all happens in software. I think Neil's work on being able to rasterize paths on the GPU sounds like it could be a great direction. I'm not sure Internet Explorer, does it rasterize paths on the GPU as well?
Some GPUs, yeah.
Okay. I remember seeing some Microsoft research paper about doing that. I'm not sure if that's the same sort of technique.
Similar,
used.
yeah.
Okay.
So from a standards perspective, Neil and I have had ongoing discussions about how we can maybe inform what the SVG working group does in terms of what it specifies, to make sure that it tries to take advantage of, or at least not work against some of the native capabilities of GPUs, and we're hoping to keep that ongoing, that as we're hoping to converge there. And then also I think that the other aspect of it is testing and performance testing. that's increasingly, testing is increasingly an activity W3C is doing, and performance is another thing that W3C has been working on. So it's possible you'll get that interoperability of performance through certain kinds of performance testing.
I think one of the best ways to help with browsers and their performance with SVG content is to file bugs with examples of code that you've written, examples that you've written which are running slowly, because it's always best for us to be working with concrete examples that we can profile, find out what things are slow. If people just complain, well, SVG is slow, and without specific examples, it's difficult to know where to sort of work on first. So if you have particular examples, please do file bugs on the different browsers on that.
Definitely.
Yeah, just to sort of echo that, SVG in particular is a very large and complicated spec. So for those of you who are starting to use it, in part because of your adoption of D3, you'll find some things are funny, and let them know about it, and they can fix it. They've been pretty responsive over the years. Actually, Doug and Neil had both sort of addressed the second question about the relationship between software and hardware, namely how are W3C and Kronos starting to collaborate, and you've answered that question, I think, so I'll skip that. Let's see. Do the implementers expect browsers in mobile and desktop to converge, or will mobile always be less powerful and different?
I think Frank should answer this.
Thank you. I think there's probably more focus on mobile across the industry right now. I don't think they'll ever maybe match, because just have different thermal capabilities on desktop versus a phone, battery limitations,
Screen size.
screen size. That helps actually, having a smaller screen.
Well, but you have to, the content has to be slightly different in order to
Yes,
be
yes.
presented correctly.
Fair enough, yes. I was thinking about rendering speed.
Sure.
But I think it will get to the point where performance on mobile will be, for the average user, as good as it is on the desktop side, I think.
Saw some great examples from Neil, was it yesterday, demoing some SVG rendering on his tablet, and it was faster than on the desktop. I mean, partly that's because of the fewer pixels it has to render, but
right.
Well, more pixels.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yes, right.
More
I
pixels.
have more pixels on my phone than I do on my desktop.
Oh, well, there you go.
It's
That's
a
a
weird
lot
thing,
of pixels.
but it makes sense obviously because you're closer, so you need more pixel density. But I think you're right. The acceleration, because mobile is battery powered, it means you need hardware acceleration more, not just because of the more pixels, but hardware acceleration is more battery efficient. So I think the mobile web is a great thing to inspire people to accelerate the web, whereas on the desktop it's been okay, it runs okay in software. But the mobile web, we have to have it in hardware, and it's a great opportunity. It's catalyzing a lot more effort to bring things into hardware acceleration. So I think mobile will be the same level of performance because of that.
There was a follow-up to that question, which was, on the other hand, is access to accelerometer and gyroscope important for browsers on mobile, apart from the obvious location?
Is it important? It already exists. It's like if you have a mobile browser today, you can use the device orientation API to use your accelerometer anyway. So,
And
what do you get by
GPS
that
and-
question? I mean,
Well, I guess I'm not sure exactly what was meant by it, but I think the extent to which accelerometer data is used as a part of the user interface starts to present another point of departure for mobile from desktop.
kind of true. The some of the Safari browsers on Macs will actually support the accelerometer. So if you actually build something that relies on the device moving around, you can actually pick up your MacBook and go and use it. So the only challenge in doing these kind of interfaces is testing it, and so we have inside Chrome DevTools, and I'm sure Firefox has as well, have the ability to simulate accelerometers. So as a content developer, you can actually sit down with the DevTools and plug in different orientations and test your UI without a real device. So the browser developers already know this is an issue, and it's quite easy to do today, like and debug it and do it all on your desktop. So Has anyone got a page? If you pull up your MacBook Pro and pull up a page that's enabled with device motion, you should be able to like rotate stuff around and it'll just work.
Actually, it's also tricky to expose some of these properties on a desktop browser. Some pages actually take window or device orientations. The existence of those properties is a signal that it's a mobile device. So you might go to some pages and get a mobile experience on your big screen. So it's a tricky thing to get people to recognize the right device.
I mean, I think they definitely have a place, and it's hard to lift up my desktop system. So I think they will be used more in mobile. But I think they should be used wisely because the precision is not that great. So if you're doing like a panorama view, it's okay. But actually, many times you see that used, it's actually just easier just to use the touch screen. So you really have to be sure that it's going to be used. But I wanted to take this opportunity to echo what Frank was saying previously, saying that a lot of the web content out there, particularly the kind of the WebGL and the more advanced SVG content, is not mobile ready yet. So we're not even using the touch screens properly yet. So all you web developers, please use the touch screen at least, and so we can actually run all your great content on mobile. Because Amanda was just saying, people are using mobile more than desktops now. So that's actually a really important thing to do.
Maybe one more from the list, and then I'll turn things over to the audience. Well, I guess there are two things. There are two important things. Do you have data on about what is in use? What percentage of websites are currently using SVG, WebGL, etc.?
Yes.
0%.
No, the figure is something like 17% for SVG.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there is we have a site that we maintain, I think it's chromestatus.com, or anyway, something like that, that uses browser metrics or the anonymized browser metrics to actually see what elements are being used, things like that. That's how we can see how much SVG is out there. And SVG has actually grown from less than 10% to about 17% of all pages today. So we do track this kind of stuff. So yeah, the simple answer is yes.
How about WebGL?
WebGL, look, I have to ask Neil about that.
We've looked at that on the Microsoft side, and we've seen a huge growth in it, especially in the past year or so. I think it's very, very hard to make a web browser in this day and age if you don't have a very, very good insight into what's happening on the web. It's just nature of making a web browser now.
Right. Okay, and then one more. Let's see. I saw it here. Oh, why won't Microsoft support Smile? With the existence of polyfills like fake Smile.
Is this your question, David?
No, it's not my question. It really is not my question. With the existence of polyfills like fake Smile, it's obviously not a performance issue, nor a massive code increase.
So we are in a mode now where we go and find the biggest interop issues and solve them as fast as we can. Smile is on a list of interop issues that we have, but it's not currently near the top of that list. So I'm not going to say never, but we are working on through a list of issues.
I think Smile's also a bit of a hot potato because traditionally, Microsoft actually had Smile support in Internet Explorer 5.5, and how many people in the audience knew that? Right, exactly. There's your answer. So I'm sure that they've had a history of trying it and it didn't work out, and so they didn't support it in IE9, which was a complete rewrite, which is understandable. But even within the Blink community, there's controversy over Smile, and we have a project currently happening in Sydney, in the Sydney Chrome team, where we're attempting to re-implement the Smile implementation inside Blink using JavaScript. So the intention there is to get rid of security bugs and things like that in the C++ and see if we can actually use a scripted language. And that approach may be viable for other browsers as well. We'll just wait and see.
And there is a unified, so there's declarative animations in CSS, and there's a script API. And Brian, are you in the audience?
Yes.
Oh.
Web
Brian
animations.
Brian gave a presentation, and we are trying to have a unified animation model across HTML, CSS, SVG, MathML.
That's deprecated.
But in any case, so Smile or some sort of declarative element support for that could be part of that larger strategy.
What I'd really like to see is for the web platform to be in a position where any of these features could be faithfully polyfilled. So if some particular browser hasn't got around to implementing some feature yet, then the development community can produce a JavaScript library which can implement that. And then later on, once everybody supports the feature, if it becomes popular, then people can stop using that JavaScript library. At the moment, for certain features, polyfills work well. For others, they don't. For example, polyfilling for new CSS properties is quite difficult. So it's definitely impossible to do faithfully, where all of the normal CSS cascading and inheritance rules and so on work for new properties that you want to define in your polyfill JavaScript. So it'd be great to see new sort of base language level features that allow people to write polyfills more easily.
Yeah, at the same time with Smile, because Smile was SVG specific, we have CSS animations and transitions at the HTML level. So web animations, which Brian's been working very hard on, is trying to unify both, and that's kind of a universal solution to HTML and SVG animation. And from a developer point of view, probably if you're familiar with CSS animation, one of the things with CSS animation is when you start one, you sit there and watch it happen and it finishes, and you have no control from JavaScript. So with the web animations model, you can actually get an object in JavaScript from your CSS animation and then manipulate the animation live. So things like touching an object that's animating, dragging it, letting go, and it continues is part of that model. So we see Smile and CSS animation coming together in a kind of a bigger model overall.
So one other thing is that we've done in the SVG2 spec is to make more of the existing attributes into properties so that you can animate them with CSS animations and transitions as well. So
Except for href,
right, not everything.
which breaks everything, but
Right.
anyhow, no, I'm just kidding.
So
Okay,
this CSS animations is also something that many web developers out there actually want, more than even Smile. That's why probably Smile is not so high on the priority list of
Right.
Microsoft.
That's because those developers are naive.
So as a SVG working group, we try to keep track of that and try to make this available for CSS developers as well. Things like declarative animations in SVG.
Sure. Okay, other people, questions?
Well, perhaps we can ask questions of the audience as well, and then get some feedback from you right away.
Why are you wearing that shirt?
What difficulties do you run into when producing web content? What features do you think are missing from the platform? What things aren't working in specific browsers that you would like to see? Especially since we have a couple of authors of visualization libraries, they, maybe more than others, would be aware of what features on the underlying platform are missing that they would really like to see.
You think it's all finished?
Yeah, I guess
You're
that's...
satisfied with everything?
I can throw the question. I suppose I want to throw the question back at you guys because, you know, we started experimenting with WebGL and getting very excited about the sort of things that we can do with that. But I don't think even, you know, just a few years ago, we even imagined that we'd be able to do that kind of stuff in the browser. So how do we get a dialogue going between the kind of things that we might want to do and the things that you might think are possible so that we're all heading in the same direction? Because you're asking us, what do you want to do next? And it's like, well, what the hell are you guys going to do next? You know, who starts this? Where does it? How do we plot that journey together?
Well, you come to the graphical web and you ask us.
So part of, from a W3C perspective, and you know, we didn't make WebGL, that was Chronos, but if you are interested in something specific to a particular technology that somebody's working on, for example, SVG, you can post a comment to the www.svg@w3.org. You don't need to remember that. You can just see SVG mailing list. You can post a question there. You can post a feature request there.
we should probably improve how we process those. But that is one way of getting feature requests in. And also, you can read the minutes of the working group to see what sort of thing we're discussing, bringing up next. You can read the specifications. If you're doing something if you're interested in a feature that you don't, that is not yet sort of in the purview of one particular working group, it's not an SVG feature, it's not a CSS feature, it's something else, you could start, you want to find out, either you have a community of like-minded people, or you want to find out if there are other people who are like-minded who want this feature. You can start a W3C community group and discuss that and build up use cases and requirements and even sample specification text. And sometimes those community groups, which are free for anybody to join and be free for anybody to participate in, we've had a case where a group of people has started on a technology and we say, yes, we're going to standardize that. We're going to work from that starting point, standardize. So web annotation, something I'm particularly interested in. I didn't think this up. I saw a demo at a conference. I saw that there was a community group about this. I approached them and said, hey, are you interested in standardizing this? And they said yes, and so we started working on trying to standardize that. Similarly, the second screen API, which was mentioned in the last session, that started as a community group and has now formed a working group. Responsive images, the whole responsive images thing, where you basically you subset an image differently based on based on how big your viewport is, or you select a different resolution or other things like that. That started in a community group, and then it got brought into the HTML working group as part of HTML. So that's a way, if you're interested in seeing, interested in influencing, interested in suggesting features, that's one mechanism to do that. If you're interested in what's happening, I personally either watch what particular working groups are working on, like the web apps working group or other things, or I read the blogs from the DevRel blogs from the different browser vendors to say what they're sort of thinking about next, because they often have a lot of like web components. If you know about web components, you would have seen miles out, like 2-3 years ago, that Google and Mozilla and several others were really talking deeply about web components, and so now you're starting to see the implementations, and you're starting to see, this is becoming a reality. Well, if you were looking at those DevRel blogs, or the blogs of individual engineers, or their Twitter feeds, or whatever, if your attention spans like mine, you would see these things that are starting to come out, and actually influencing them early on, getting involved in discussions in the mailing list, community groups, etc., early on means that your use cases are more likely to be addressed. Does that start to address your question? Sorry.
I'd just add to that. I think that's all very well what Doug said, and I agree with everything he said. But if there's a feature that's small and simple that doesn't need that kind of standards involvement,
do a polyfill.
No, not even the polyfill. There are bug trackers for all the browsers. They're all public bug trackers. So if you say, say you have some problem with international text in, Devanagari or something, you can just go to the Chrome bug tracker and say, there is this thing doesn't work properly. I have lots of Indian readers. Can you fix this and add this feature? And then you can do the same for Firefox and Opera and everything. So small features like that are easy to get in. If you're looking for a bigger feature, if you wanted to do some kind of augmented reality immersive thing, you're probably better off going and talking to the developer relations teams and finding a champion. Like, go and corner some guy at a conference and say, hey, you work for Firefox or whatever, I'd like to do this, what do you think? And then get them interested and let them do all the hard work for you.
I think another thing that is a good clue is that the web platform seems to be following very closely behind all the best ideas from the native platforms. So if there's any gaps that you see, people are definitely interested in closing those gaps.
And just because I didn't talk enough before, we try to track we're not always successful, we try to track what script libraries are doing and what popular applications are doing. And if we see something that is becoming more common, or if we see something that's really cool and we're like, how did they do that, and what did they have to overcome in order to accomplish that. We will try to incorporate things like that into standards. So if you have a really good idea and you can prototype it, that's really convincing that, especially if you can prototype it but it doesn't work really well, that's really convincing that maybe that's something that should be in the browser rather than just another script library.
Does that mean you're implementing replicate?
Absolutely. in JavaScript.
So I just wanted to follow on from something that Frank said. I think the native API standards can be kind of a window into the future, kind of zooming out a little bit. You said, well, what technology is coming, and the new wave of stuff that's being worked on that isn't, or is just beginning to get shipped, is to do with vision processing. I think vision processing is going to be really important. It's, we're so used to graphics, which is taking data and producing imagery. Well, vision closes the loop. It starts with images grabbed from a sensor and creates data from that. And that's going to create a much richer set of graphics capabilities as well as analysis capabilities. And I think the web is going to need that quite quickly, actually, because it's going to be used quite widely in native land. So,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, so it's going to be really interesting to see how we bring those capabilities into the web. And augmented reality is the kind of the poster boy. It's really hard. Augmented reality is like the ultimate vision app because everything in the system has to work together seamlessly. There's lots more kind of intermediate steps, I think, where vision in the browser is going to be useful.
It's going to be useful for that brief period of time between when we start making applications that can look around us and interact with the world, and when Skynet destroys humanity.
I, for one, welcome our robot overlords.
Our hardware accelerated.
You said earlier that Canvas is already hardware accelerated. Did you mean WebGL or 2D Canvas as well?
2D Canvas. 2D Canvas is hardware accelerated in most modern browsers today. At the moment, within Blink at least, it's a hybrid. There's a little bit of software rasterizing for the edges of strokes to make anti-aliasing better, but the vast majority of painting is done on hardware. So,
Canvas is one of the big arms races between all the browsers. There was a big JavaScript performance arms race, and then a Canvas performance arms race. So we probably should have an SVG performance arms race now.
yeah.
I think that came about because it's pretty easy to write sort of stress tests in Canvas to test performance, and people were competing on trying to improve performance. With SVG, less content out there, less of a body of work to try and work against.
Yeah, exactly. And
most
if you do an HTML5 gaming course today, the vast majority of them tell you to use Canvas, right? And so gaming is a high performance thing, so performance of Canvas is critical, and that's why the browser vendors have put all their energy there.
I mean, this is not to say that SVG is not getting work in performance.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Like, I think probably all of our implementations, well, IE's already finished in terms of performance in SVG, I guess, but I know that at Mozilla, Jonathan right here has been doing a lot of work on improving SVG performance, and probably Chrome guys have been doing that too.
Yep.
Okay, another question. So basically, text on a canvas. Anybody's working on to improve the layout and the metrics and stuff like that. I mean, currently the support for text on the canvas is very poor.
You're talking about subpixel anti-aliasing, or what in particular?
It's almost impossible to get any metrics from the text when you just trying to display it. Width, height, all kinds of stuff, ascent, descent.
Yep.
Yeah.
There has been discussion of a font metrics API that would be sort of cross, Canvas, SVG, CSS. I don't know if anybody's actually picked up work on that.
I have a feeling that the Canvas spec, edited by your colleague Rick Cavanier, has already grown some more detailed metrics information to come back from some font APIs.
So there are details about some things like for positioning and sizing fonts, but font metrics as a way of getting the dimension of a text or something like that, that's not in yet.
Not yet.
No. I know that in web applications that we have on some of our products, people basically do the metrics separate to the canvas. They have an off-screen chunk of DOM measure there and then draw on the canvas, which is not ideal, but that's the way they get around it.
In the worst case, so you would have seen my talk yesterday about the font stuff. You could, in JavaScript, grab your downloadable font, parse the open type format, grab out all the metrics if you wanted to.
Hi. I want to bring back the discussion back to how do you influence web standards and implementers to actually implement new features. And Alex from Google, you mentioned you just open up a bug and you would hope somebody implements. And Doug, you mentioned somebody builds a polyfill, a prototype, and that inspires implementers. Realistically, though, because we've seen stuff like this being done, yet the features never made it through. Realistically, how do us as web developers draw attention to the things that we actually think are important? How do we convince implementers to take us seriously to implement these new features?
I think the number one way to do that is to find somebody on one of the browser teams that's involved in developing browsers and get them to listen to you. So logging a bug, someone will look at it, they'll triage it. If you mail something to one of the mailing lists, it will be looked at, but unless you actually have a person sitting on that working group, sitting on the phone conferences, championing that feature, it will get forgotten. Right? Just know that that's what happens. So go to a developer relations guy or whatever, that's on one of the browser teams and say, hey, look, this is a feature we need because, at the BBC, say, we have this problem that we can't feature detect WebGL in a particular browser and it's broken and this doesn't work, or the UA string is stupid and we can't rely on it, and convince them, hey, this is something that web developers actually need because that's what we listen to. The developer relations team job, at least at Google, is to take input from web developers and bring it back to the engineering teams. It's not an evangelism role. It's not like, hey, do this. It's like, if you tell us you have a real problem, it's our job to bash the guys in Mountain View over the head and say, hey, implement this feature in Blink. So step one, find a champion and convince them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think another, if you're trying to go more of a broader approach, not a specific browser vendor, but in general, there's a discourse implementation called discourse.specifiction.org, I believe. I find me and I can tell you where it is, and it's basically a place to send comments and wish lists for W3C specs. One way not to get a feature implemented or get attention to something is to come on mailing lists and insult and bully the implementers. That works really poorly in terms of trying to affect social change. But I take, for example, the responsive images community group as a really great example of some people who wanted a feature, wanted it to be implemented a certain way. These were people who were not involved in standards. They formed a community group. They built a polyfill. They ultimately got somebody to implement it in WebKit, or maybe it was Blink. I can't remember. In any case,
it was WebKit.
It was WebKit. Yeah. They were really activist about it, and they kept pushing it. They raised awareness. They made a website. They spoke about it at conferences. They found a bunch of like-minded people who really wanted this to happen. They wrote articles on Event Apart, etc., and they lobbied for it, and that has worked. I mean, that is an actual case where that has worked. If that, that takes persistence. Standards is a persistence game. Are you willing to? Do you want that feature so badly that you're willing to lobby for that feature to be in a browser 2 years from now, not right now when you're working on that particular project? And can you convince other people of the need for that feature?
And that's why if it takes 2 years, find the champion to do the lobbying for you for 2 years, because as a web developer, you don't want to waste your time with that.
Yeah.
Just find the person that listens to you and realizes that that's a real need, and they will fight the fight.
But I think building a community around it is important, because if it's just one person...
It all helps. all of these things are good approaches.
Yeah.
Sorry? That's very effective.
Yes.
More the better.
Buy us all various gifts and
Thank you for that. Would another way simply be to look at, say, existing desktop software that's quite high-end and simply say, how could this be built in web technology? Like, could you build Final Cut 10 or something equivalent to that, or After Effects, for example, in the web browser? And it's probably not. And some of that would be performance, but some of it would just be impossible. And so would it be possible to simply say, how do we sort of dissect and work out what bits are missing to build an After Effects? And even if you don't build the whole app, even if you just focus on some of the core things like compositing video together, or pulling frames out of a video and merging it with the next, or analyzing it for stability, or if you went through all this stuff, you then very quickly come up with APIs saying we need access to the raw pixel data of frames of video, and I'm just picking video because I do a certain amount of video, but there's a lot of other applications like that where you would in 10 minutes come up with 50 things that would be impossible to do in the web environment. And so that would give you quite a long list of stuff to do.
Well, I think that alludes a lot to what Frank said, that a lot of what's happening now in the browser space is where we're trying to identify differences between native app capabilities and web app capabilities, right? And I think that gap is closing. And for things like video, which you specifically mentioned, I mean, yes, I totally agree, and I think you can probably do most things already in a browser today. Like I would probably say you could get Emscripten, compile, After Effects into JavaScript and run it in one of the modern browsers, and it would run okay. But when it comes to actually putting that capability on the web, you actually said, access to the pixel data to get the pixel data back to composite it together. That's where we run into problems. Like we run into timing attacks and security issues this kind of thing. So the drive-by open web poses a set of security challenges that just aren't present for desktop native apps, and that's the thing that we need to fix.
One thing that, say, Mozilla are doing with their Firefox OS is you get sort of blessed permissions. So maybe you could have one of the permissions would actually be to allow things that would otherwise have timing attacks, or would allow access to the raw pixel data because you've blessed the app already. So you could do dozens of extra things that would otherwise give you access to read images from the web and whatever. So maybe you could relax stuff.
Well, I know that there are people on this table right here that have done demos of live video effects in the browser or in browser plugins in the last few years. So it is technically possible, definitely. And we'd love to close that gap, but again, any new feature like that will be examined probably number one for security, and then number two for performance and whether it can actually be done. And I would say, literally, anything you can do in a native app, you can do in a web app from a performance standpoint, but a security standpoint is a different thing.
Okay. Also, one or two really specific things. One thing that I want to be able to do in my app is grab an SVG as an image, so say a JPEG. And it's an incredibly horrible hack that works in some browsers. You can basically paint it to a canvas and then ask a canvas for the image. But up until recently, I'm not sure if it actually worked in any browsers, because the moment this has been fixed, I think, to some extent, but when you paint it to the canvas, that would dirty the canvas because it could have had like a foreign object in it or something like that. And I think, I haven't checked very recently, but I know, for example, when they did fix it in Chrome, if you had images in there, then it would still dirty it. But even if these were like base 64, so it's just a whole horrible API. And I think that's a very powerful thing to be able to do, to be able to draw an SVG and then grab it as a raw pixel thing. And I think that should have an API, just a simple, you could just call on an SVG DOM node, give me a PNG, like you can for a canvas, and that would be much cleaner than having to go through all these.
I think everybody here agrees. In fact, we've actually proposed that on the SVG working group in the past, to have an API like that. We've had proposals where you could take an entire subtree, render it to a raster, and throw away the subtree as a memory optimization. These things have been discussed in the working group over the years, and in the case that you're talking about with images on canvas, the issue we have there is cause requests and cross-origin security is the reason that the canvas is tainted and it doesn't allow you to capture it. So again, it falls straight into that security bucket.
Okay. And one final thing I brought up in a different talk, this is very Firefox specific, but my app I'm building will not run in Firefox ever for one thing, FE image. So what process do I go through to get Firefox to add the FE image support? How would I lobby for that then? As a good example, firstly because I would like that, and it's been 5 years and never been implemented. Another thing, what's the process I would go through? So someone else could go through the process of maybe trying to convince people this is a useful feature, because I don't think many people use it, where I've discussed it with other SVG developers, because they know Firefox doesn't support it, so it doesn't get used. It's sort of a vicious circle. So how would I go about finding someone who I could say, this is really useful and my app will never run because it relies on that one feature so much?
I like FE image too.
Yeah, it's really...
Before answering the process question, is it actually true we don't implement FE image, or just not for external files?
It doesn't support external. The most useful case of it is to bring other pieces of SVG into a filter.
Okay,
it doesn't
yes.
support
So,
that.
so yeah, so that's right. So we support referencing external images
like
as a
an
whole, I
external
guess,
GIF
but
or
not
something you could
subtrees.
bring. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess. I mean, surely there will be an open bug already for that,
there is. And lots of the comments just say, please add this, and then other people say, please don't use the bug tracker for just asking for features on it.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, although on the one hand we might say, please don't just spam the bug with comments saying, please add this. In reality, it actually does give us a bit of an indication that that is a desired feature. Yeah, don't tell anybody else that.
I mean, one other thing I was thinking just now is you can actually upvote things. So if I say proposed on a mailing list of other, people who have discussed it and saying it's missing, if I email them saying, could they all go and vote for it? And then if it got, I think currently it literally has 2 or 3 votes. And although I think a lot of other people, I've literally met 10 people that wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I sent it out on a mailing list, and is that a good technique? And then it will get a lot of upvotes.
So the voting feature on bugs on Bugzilla, some developers pay attention to that and some others don't. I mean, it's not a very well surfaced number on the bug, so it's not obvious what bugs have higher votes and which ones don't.
I mean, a lot of things just have such low numbers that they just sort of disappear in the noise, really.
Yeah. So what would be the most effective way to advocate for that? I mean, so presumably we know that there are various people who want that feature.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the reason behind not supporting that subtree referencing part. Presumably there's some difficulties with doing that.
Okay.
I would say if you want to get a clearer reason why this bug has been open for a while and there's been no action on it, would be to mail one of the people in charge of that area of code. Okay. So that would be Jonathan here. And not me. Okay. So it's difficult because, I mean, as with all organisations, we're resource constrained and we have priorities.
Yeah, I mean, there are other things in other browsers. It's just one specific for me. I was wondering about the best process to follow.
Probably bypassing that Bugzilla process and emailing directly
so
to get some reasoning behind the current status.
And they don't mind that they do get emails just asking, will this happen?
No, I think we actually like getting emails directly from developers because we can go back and forth.
Yeah, and I'd be willing to test it with some of my code and say, does it perform against the other browsers?
Well, producing compelling test cases that go, hey, this works great in the other browsers and I really need this feature and lots of web developers do, and here it is.
So the best thing would be to sort of take a small cut of my code and actually
minimal
put that
test
out there.
case.
A minimal test case, the smallest possible test case that shows how useful it is, that it works, and it's like, well, it works in all these browsers but yours. And then it's like, hey, that's a real bug.
And you can actually submit tests to W3C through web platform tests or through web, test the web forward. And so go in, find the section of the specification that says that this is the specified behavior, and write a minimal test case that tests that and get it into the test suites, and that's one way of
I wasn't even aware of that.
Of prosecuting that case.
Okay, I'll do exactly that. All right, well, thank you very much. That really answered everything. Thank you.
Andreas had a question.
My question was partially answered.
Okay.
But it was about the integration of technologies like WebGL, SVG, and Canvas. Have there been any recent improvements? Do we have examples how this could work? For example, can I put an SVG inside the WebGL as a texture or something?
That's a good question. That's an excellent question.
Okay, so I think the question was to do with the integration of these different graphics technologies, SVG, WebGL, HTML. For example,
Canvas.
can you use SVG content and put that in a texture and use that in your WebGL content? Probably you could use the same circuitous route that somebody else mentioned about rendering things to a canvas, and then you get a 2D image that you can then put into your texture. I don't know. There's no better way to do that at the moment, I don't think.
That's actually used. This technique.
Yeah, you can actually render a SVG to a canvas directly and then use that. But I think there is a need in the web platform to combine more of the imaging technologies. For example, there's a SVG path concept and a canvas path concept. They've been somewhat aligned, but they could be aligned more. Any place in the platform where you have a bitmap, like an image or a canvas or a WebGL canvas, you should just be able to use that as a background image or hide it if you want. Right now, there's very, very dissimilar concepts in all these areas, and they really should just be the same thing. Probably a bad way to do all this would be to start over with a HTML5 spec, but that would be the most elegant solution. But I think over time, we'll align all these things.
So I just want to more or less respond to what was mentioned earlier question. Because, I mean, this is just one specific example of particular filter not being implemented. I mean, there are a lot of these examples and also cases where things don't maybe just, I mean, they're implemented, but they maybe not work exactly as they're supposed to in some case. And what I would like to see is, because, I mean, you are resource constrained and nobody's perfect, is more attention to this from like the standard specification point of view. Like, what are, for example, like the core things that you need to implement, which would more or less allow you to do a lot of these things as a kind of polyfill, basically. So, for example, if you look at SVG filters, there's so much overlap there that if it had been defined a little bit differently, you could probably just implement 5 filters or something, and the rest would just basically could have been replaced by different combinations of those. So
I kind of disagree with SVG filters, at least. SVG filters, these primitives are, most of them have their unique use cases.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't have these filters. I'm saying that, for example, you have these really complicated filters like FE specular lighting. That could be used. That might be a useful filter, but at the same time, you could probably implement most of that using a combination of other filters. It wouldn't be as high quality, etc. But if the spec had taken that into account and basically made this obvious, you know, like, okay, we actually define FE specular lighting as being equivalent to this combination of other filters.
So
that
that's
would make
actually
it a
an
lot
approach
easier.
that we take now, and you find these so-called filter functions. There are a couple like sepia, grayscale, or drop shadow, which do exactly what you asked for. Combine some of these primitives to a more broader filter that is actually used more often, and let users use these kind of filters in a very simple way. And if you have suggestions for other filters, then we are happy to hear them.
There's another, this kind of raises another question, which is, what if, for example, you had the question about FE image and blah, 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 whatever it was. Maybe when you go to the specification, you find that the use case that you're talking about is actually kind of ambiguous in the specification. And so you have the test case, but you're like, well, how should browsers behave here? And that's a case where you should both give us the test, but also suggest refinement of the specification, because the specifications aren't perfect either. We miss things. So if there's something in the filter specification that's where it doesn't cover your use case, now maybe it won't be decided in your favor, right? Maybe we'll decide to specify it in a way that the behavior you want isn't possible, but at least then it's not ambiguous. So if there's ambiguities in the spec, you should always come to us.
Can you have a clarification from Alex? The percentage of SVG websites, was it 17 or 70?
17, unfortunately. But 17 is still a pretty significant number when you consider how long SVG has been in all the major browsers. So the growth rate is pretty good.
The question was, what is the percentage of SVG in web pages?
Yeah.
So I mean, you can go on the chromestatus.com website and just check for yourselves. I mean, there are counters for lots of different web features, so it's easy to tell.
Chromestatus.com, and you can pick different elements and have a look at the currents.
Usage number.
A lot of pages use it for the logos.
Lots of pages use it for lots of things, in fact. The LA Times uses SVG and smile animation to do a spinner when you're waiting for it to load.
The little Google Plus button is SVG.
Yeah.
Okay, more. Oh, they're in the back.
No, because then it's not on the, it's easier.
We're recording, so it's easier for the recording to keep it
So first, thanks for your work. It's really appreciated. I have a question. Web Audio API, for instance, it's very nice. It does a lot of things. It's a routing graph-based. Canvas, really useful. It's more like a state machine. SVG, it's addressed like a DOM element interface. Is there any idea or any effort to try to get all the APIs to kind of work, not together, but have a similar API, you know, like WebGL is very raw, Web Audio is no, I don't know. Is that something that it's concerning when in creating a new approach to features?
Yes, all the time. No, I'm actually serious about this. We try to unify these kind of things, these different approaches as much as possible. And we use certain parts, and that's actually also in the interest of implementations, that you can view certain things. For instance, the last one is a discussion about supporting CSS filters or SVG filters in Canvas. This would use exactly the same approach as we use it in HTML or SVG already. So yeah, definitely.
So, but there are some sort of native semantics. No, I shouldn't use that word. But like when describing Canvas, well, it is a state machine. When you're describing the Web Audio API, well, it is a graph. So it would be, I think, torturous. I mean, we can reuse certain concepts. Like, for example, in the Web Audio API, we've added chaining and things like that. But there's some basic API considerations, but it would be torturous to force people to use one single model for every type of media.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It's a question that most developers sometimes be without understanding why it's like that. They ask. What I mean, it's like Web Audio has all these nodes that do very specific stuff, and that's why it's based on a model. Canvas doesn't have that many integrated filters or operations. So, and WebGL has like literally none. You have to come up with all of them. So that's what I meant, like providing more tools, more useful tools, like all those common cases that that are there for developers to use. Just, I know it's not possible to create the seamless API across all the different technologies. It's just more like the concept, like this has some nice features and this has none, and you have to come up with them with a library or all that.
I think all the implementers are very concerned about making APIs that are very architecturally clean and useful. If you put something in a browser and web pages start using it, you're looking at about a 10-year lifespan, which is half the age of the web. So if you make a mistake, it's a 10-year long mistake.
Thanks.
Anything else? Maybe one more and then lunch?
David,
two more and then lunch.
Yeah, one more thing. Something I do very heavily, it's just a sort of personal pattern, but I embed a lot of SVG into CSS. So if I want a particular button to look a particular way, I just put my SVG straight in there. And it works really well, but most people, firstly, not aware you can even do it. The way you do it is you do background image, and then you data URI /XML/SVG, then you have the SVG tag, with all the namespacing and stuff, and it works wonderfully. And I recommend it to other people. And I go, you can put, rather than having to have 4 things and do, corner radius to try and draw a circle, just put a circle in SVG. Is there any sort of thought to maybe make it more friendly to put SVG into CSS? So they could be like background-SVG or background-SVG image, or just something where it was firstly more obvious you could do that. As long as you think it's a good thing putting SVG into CSS, maybe you think it's a bad thing, but I mean, I use it very heavily. So is there any sort of thought to do that and make it a bit more friendly, so you don't have to type a big string of stuff every single time?
So there have been some thoughts about, especially for SVG filters, SVG masks, and so on. These are recurring primitives that we use quite often in different web pages, and you possibly don't want to have them in every different document. So there have been discussions to put these kind of things, SVG-like primitives, into CSS. There's no concrete proposals for that yet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have got an experiment. It's not meant for CSS, but I do have an experiment that serializes much of SVG as a URL, and it could be. I guess you could use that in CSS. I hadn't considered that as a use case.
I'm going to do the data URI thing all the time. It's a long, sort of 25 characters. It's probably 25 characters, and I probably use it 100 times, or in each CSS. I use it a lot, and so it's just something. And I find it a very powerful way of working. And I think it came around as an accident. I don't think it was ever even deliberate. I think just data URI supported PNG and whatever, it just happened to support SVG along with it.
So one CSS feature upcoming that might help you to avoid the repetition there is CSS variables. So you could define a variable named -- my SVG icon, and then in your background image properties, wherever you're going to use it, in your style sheet, you can refer to that variable. So that would at least let you avoid the duplication. But strings, no. You can make up values from tokens being appended. So if you've got like separate like number and keyword after that, if that makes sense in the property you're using it, but you can't concatenate strings.
I have a quick question about statistics. I'm just curious if you have statistics on how many percent of websites using Canvas. So I've heard about SVG, but Canvas.
Yes, well, at chromestatus.com we keep stats on most of the elements that we kind of try and keep track of. So yes, if you just go there and click the drop down and have a look at Canvas element, you'll see there'll be a number there, which is an indicative percentage, right? It's anonymized data, not everyone opts in for that, so it's not 100% accurate, but it's a pretty good guess.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much.